The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, welcome everybody.
For all of you new listeners out there, welcome to the Wanderers family.
We're really happy that you chose to join us. And if you haven't already, check out our Facebook page because every Tuesday I post pictures of what's coming up for Thursday's episode, kind of like a little teaser, and you can see ahead of time what we're going to be talking about.
So, I think what we're going to do is skip tonight's housekeeping because there's a thunderstorm rolling in and we don't want to lose power or have all those thunder boomers in our audio. So, with that said, Beth, why don't you get us started tonight?
Alrighty. So, the Maine State Library in Augusta, Maine, is an imposing building made of glass and concrete. Inside, you can browse the thousands of titles, dive into archival research, and see a tiny little artifact that could easily sit in the palm of your hand. This artifact has been surrounded by controversy since the day it was discovered in 1957, which is kind of funny since it's so tiny. Known as the Maine penny, it doesn't look like a coin from colonial times. It wasn't held by some notorious gangster or proves that some hidden trove of gold and silver is buried in Maine somewhere. So why is it there, and why is it so controversial? Because the Maine penny is an authenticated Viking coin dated to the time of Norwegian King Olaf Kyrre, who ruled from 1067 to 1093. And it was found at the Goddard Archaeological Site on Naskeg Point, Maine. Are you thinking, yeah, so? Well, the discovery of the Maine penny not only indicated that Vikings landed in North America way before any other European explorers, but that the Vikings traveled way further south than we ever thought, which makes it the only verified pre-Columbian Viking artifact ever found in the United States. But maybe you've heard of the equally controversial Kensington runestone found in Minnesota in the late 1800s. Well, what makes the Maine penny different is that it has been verified by several institutions, like the Smithsonian Museum, as an authentic 11th century Viking coin. So, what's the controversy? Well, for my half of the episode tonight, I'm going to tell you all about it. According to atlasobscura.com, in the fall of 1956, amateur archaeologists Guy Melgren and Ed Runge were looking for shell middens along the coast of Maine. Instead, they met a man named Goddard, who offered to let them explore his shoreline property. Both Melgren and Runge were ecstatic to discover stone chips, knives, and fire pits. The two men returned to the site, which they called the Goddard site, the following summer. Excited by their finds, they didn't call in professional archaeologists, which I get. They were amateurs and they were excited about what they were finding. On August 18, 1957, Mellgren unearthed the small, tarnished silver coin. Under 2/3 of an inch in diameter, it has a cross with 2 horizontal lines on one side of the coin and an animal-like figure on the other side with a mane like a horse. Immediately believing that it was an English coin, he had it analyzed by a friend who was also a coin expert. His friend confirmed that it was indeed as old as the 12th century. For the next 20 years, Mellgren insisted that the coin was English and that perhaps English explorers had discovered America, because how else could it have gotten to the Goddard site? It was a good question, since the Goddard site turned out to be a Native American site rich in trade goods. Professional archaeologists believe the people who lived there were the ancestors of the Penobscot Indians. Over 30,000 artifacts were unearthed there, including pottery from as far away as New Jersey, the remnants of a longhouse, clay artifacts, and worked copper that undoubtedly came from Europe. Mellgren was pretty excited about finding the rare and intriguing coin, and he was happy to show it to friends. He even allowed his son to bring it to school for show and tell.
Oh my God, can you imagine?
No.
I mean, I would be afraid that kid would, trade it for a pencil eraser or something else that's cool that kids like.
A pudding cup or a Twinkie.
Yeah, a pudding cup or a Twinkie, dear. That's probably what you would trade it for.
Well, yeah. I wouldn't trade it for an eraser cap.
Depends how cool it was.
That's true. 20 years went by, and nobody really made a big deal about Mellgren's Maine penny. It was an oddity, for sure, and posed some major questions about who really arrived in the modern-day U.S. first, Columbus or the English, but nobody seemed to want to dig into that question. Of course, today, we know that Columbus never landed in North America at all, and that Leif Erikson may have been the first explorer to arrive in Newfoundland. But in 1957, well, you'd think more people would be questioning how a British coin from the 1100s ended up in a Native American village in Maine. Finally, in 1978, an article was published with the title, "Were the English the First to Discover America?" Although it was only a regional article, it quickly gained international attention. So international, in fact, that an antique dealer in London took notice and announced immediately that the Maine penny was not a British coin at all. It was actually Norse and dated from 1065 to 1093.
No, that had to blow their minds.
It had to have blown their minds. In a Native American trading hub.
Well, who else would you trade with?
Oh, I know. It's wild.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So it seemed that Mellgren's find had finally garnered the attention it deserved, and historians and archaeologists clamored to examine the coin and ask themselves, did Vikings actually sail to the U.S.? Up until that point, it was a well-established fact that Leif Erikson, or at least some group of Vikings led by someone, had arrived and settled in Greenland and Newfoundland, but nobody had even considered that they had sailed all the way to Maine. The Kensington runestone in Minnesota had already been proven as a hoax, so it was more likely that the Maine penny was a hoax as well. But why? Why would Mellgren claim for 20 years that the coin was British and not Viking if he was trying to pull a hoax. And if it was a hoax, why didn't he do more with it while he was alive? At this point, Mellgren had passed away, so no one could ask him. But they could analyze the coin. According to AncientOrigins.com, several experts did, including Kolbjorn Skær, a Norwegian coin expert. It was his opinion, along with all the other experts' opinions, that the Maine penny was an authentic Norwegian penny from sometime between 1065 and 1080. So how did it get to Maine? First, experts tried to figure out exactly where it had come from. Interestingly, Lanza Meadows, the Viking site in Newfoundland, wasn't discovered until 1960, 3 years after Mellgren found the penny. But the site did provide 100% irrefutable proof that Vikings did settle in North America in the 11th century. So, perhaps the coin came from there. Maybe. Further proving that the coin must have been carried by a Viking settler, it didn't match any known hoards. For example, the Gressley hoard, which contained hundreds of coins that were eventually sold, didn't match the Maine penny at all. What that means is there was no proof that Mellgren had purchased the coin and then planted it at the Goddard site. Because that's the controversy. Experts are still firmly divided over whether Mellgren perpetrated a hoax or the Maine penny was really dropped by a Viking back in 1093. Further support for the coin having been dropped by a Viking or traded to one of the native people is that it showed under spectroscopy.
Nice.
It showed typical wear and tear, reserved for coins that have been battered by water over a long period of time, which makes sense since it was found on the shoreline. The Goddard site is unique in that it holds all kinds of artifacts that don't quite fit the narrative, like a Dorset Eskimo burin. The Dorset culture lasted between 500 and 1000 CE in what is now Nunavut, Canada. A burin is a flint tool with a sharpened point. So the only way for these random artifacts to have ended up at the Goddard site is if it was a major trading post for sailors from all over the world between 1000 and 1235. Now, the Maine penny also has a hole in it, which many supporters point out could mean that it was worn as a necklace by whoever traded it or received it in trade. Skeptics still argue that the Maine penny was a hoax. Now, they don't argue that the coin isn't an authentic Viking coin, but they do propose that Mellgren planted it at the site. They point out that not a single other Viking artifact has ever been found there. If Vikings had traded with the Goddard site natives, then surely there would be more evidence. According to Grunge.com, the late 1950s was known for all kinds of Viking hoaxes, specifically when it came to coins and fake maps. Lastly, skeptics point out that Mellgren himself was a coin collector, and he worked part-time at an auction house, insinuating that he could have picked up the coin at an auction. They also point out that the surname Mellgren is Swedish, and therefore he might have had an ulterior motive for planting the coin. But let's look at this logically. Why would he have claimed the coin was British for 20 years if his real scheme was for it to come out as Viking after his death? What did he gain from it? Absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, the Goddard site, which he discovered, has gone on to be a major archaeological find, offering all kinds of fascinating glimpses into history. Now, there's a third possibility that I hadn't mentioned so far, and this isn't my original thought. This is another theory that I found online, and it was suggested by several of the sources I looked at, like strangenewengland.com. Perhaps the coin had originally come from the Viking settlement in Newfoundland and through trade after trade had made its way to Maine, but not by actual Vikings, but by the native people themselves. The thing is, the Goddard site holds way more mysteries than just the Maine penny, as far as how several of the incongruous artifacts got there. So why so much controversy over a tiny little penny? It seems to me like they have other mysteries there to solve too, not just the penny. But it's definitely interesting. So as I was researching for this story, they kept alluding to the Kensington runestone because most of those sites that were saying the Maine penny was a hoax were saying that the Kensington runestone was a hoax. And from what I read, it does sound like it was to me. But there are some staunch supporters out there which say it absolutely is authentic, which means that the Vikings didn't just settle in Maine, they went as far in as Minnesota.
And as I was sitting here listening to your story, I was thinking to myself, what if the Vikings traded meat or spices to the Indians? It wouldn't show up. I could see them trading something like that. And the only way you would know that is to exhume some Native American bodies. And, that's not going to happen.
Right. They would have to do testing to see if there was any evidence of mead or whatever in their bones, in their remains. And you're right, they're not going to do that.
I mean, I guess you could argue that the spices and the mead would be in some kind of Viking vessel as far as a container of some sort.
Right.
But not necessarily either.
No.
It could have been poured in the vessels that the Indians used.
Right. They had their own that they brought it in, and then they poured it into something the natives already had.
So, that could have been a thing.
Good point.
I mean, that's just my little observation that didn't seem to be mentioned, so who knows?
Yeah. I'd never heard of the Maine penny before, so I was pretty excited. It doesn't look anything like a penny, by the way. It definitely looks like an ancient Viking coin. There's nothing penny about it. Not quite sure why they call it that, but.
Well, we look at it in American coinage, I guess.
Well, maybe since he originally thought it was English, maybe that's why he referred to it as a penny. I don't know. Could be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, with that said, we'll be right back after this quick break.
Hey, did you know? In 1992, while working along Highway 54 outside of San Diego, California, an amazing discovery was found. The massive skeleton of a mastodon dating back 130,000 years. But what made the find so extraordinary was that the skeletal remains showed strong evidence of human interaction. The stones immediately around the carcass looked as if they were specifically used to smash the meat from the bones. The only problem? Humans weren't believed to exist in California until 100,000 years later. The Cerruti mastodon, as it is known, could seriously rewrite human history. Except critics argue that the young mastodon simply died from a short-faced bear encounter, or perhaps it was trampled by other mastodons. That can't really explain the tool-like stones found right next to it, though. Who'da thunk it?
All right, we're back.
We had one mysterious archaeological find after another tonight. But, what are you going to do? So, what are you talking about tonight?
Well, tonight I'm talking about two cryptids. One that you may have all heard of before, and one that I'm sure you probably haven't. Every single one of our 50 states has their own cryptid. For example, 49 states have Bigfoot sightings, the only exception being Hawaii. 35 U.S. states claim to have a lake monster. A handful of states have reported cryptids with wings, like Mothman and our favorite Bat Squatch. It seems that all over our country, for hundreds of years, people have been seeing strange creatures that they just can't explain. So tonight, I thought that we'd talk about two cryptids that are not Bigfoot-like. One is a lake monster of sorts, but it's still unlike any other lake monster you may have heard of. These two that I'm going to be talking about, like the Snallygaster, the Dover Demon, or Bat Squatch, are in a league of their own. The Van Meter Monster and Sinkhole Sam. The city of Van Meter, Iowa, stretches along the Raccoon River in Dallas County. As of 2020, the population was 1,484 people. So it's a city with a small-town vibe, even though it's just 20 minutes from Des Moines, Iowa. Founded in 1869, it was named after Jacob Rhodes van Meter, a Dutch settler from the Netherlands. It's also the home of baseball legend Bob Feller, the Heater from Van Meter, who played with the Cleveland Indians for 18 seasons between 1936 and 1956. But in 1903, the people of Van Meter witnessed the birth of a different kind of legend, the cryptid kind. According to a 1903 newspaper article titled A Winged Monster, Ulysses Griffith, a well-liked and respected implement dealer, was driving into town around 1 a.m. when he caught sight of what he thought was an electric searchlight shining on Mayor and Greg's store. But as the searchlight sailed across the rooftops and landed on a building, he realized it was some sort of living creature. The following night, September 29th, according to the article, Dr. A.C. Alcott woke up in his bed with a strange light glowing in his face. It was coming through his office window, and curious, he grabbed his shotgun and went outside. Perched on a telephone pole was a creature unlike he'd never seen before. Although taller than a human, at approximately 9 feet tall, it stood on 2 legs. It had enormous bat-like wings. And its head was shaped like a bird's, with round eyes and a sharp pointed beak. But the light that had woken up the doctor was coming from a horn on the creature's head, and the stench coming from the creature was overwhelming. Terrified, the doctor shot at the creature. The creature simply shrugged it off. The doctor ran back inside his office, locked all the doors and windows, and stayed awake until morning. That same night, according to the Des Moines Register, a bank cashier named Peter Dunn also saw the creature and shot at it, which had the same effect that the doctor's gunshots had had. The creature nonchalantly flew away. Peter Dunn was able to find the creature's tracks, though, and he made plaster casts. They were three-toed and strange. The next night, September 30th, there were 3 more witnesses. O.V. White, the hardware store owner, heard strange noises outside his store. He too grabbed his shotgun and went outside. Known as the best shot in town, he was confident that he could take down whatever was causing the ruckus. He spotted the creature up on the roof. It emitted a horrible stench, and although it screeched as he fired at it, it was completely unharmed and flew off. The shooting woke up Sidney Gregg, who was asleep in his own store nearby. He watched the creature, quote, hop like a kangaroo. However, Gregg's encounter seems to differ depending on the source. NorthAmericanCryptids.com says Gregg was a banker, and as he walked home that evening, he encountered the creature in an alley. It actually jumped up on him and knocked him down. Luckily, he was able to fight it off and make his way home unscathed. He added to the creature's description, saying it had smooth skin, very large eyes, and a blunt nose, which is different from the pointed beak most often depicted in sketches of the creature. The third man to encounter the creature that night was the local high school teacher, who described it as, quote, devil-like.
You know what I find kind of strange? Is that all these men were sleeping in their stores.
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of odd? I mean, I guess maybe they had rooms in the back of their stores that were their homes.
Right. Well, I think a lot of them probably lived above their store.
Yeah.
They had an apartment upstairs.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just, it was funny hearing, 2 or 3 in a row that were all asleep in their stores.
Right. The townsfolk believed that the creature, now known as the Van Meter Visitor or Van Meter Monster, was living in the abandoned coal mine near the brickyard, since local man J.L. Platt Jr. claimed that he had heard strange noises coming from inside the mine. The town was terrified, and according to newspaper articles at the time, no one dared to sleep except during the daytime. On October 2nd, they formed a posse, determined to take down the creature. They approached the abandoned mine. They stood at the ready, listening. The Des Moines Daily News reported on October 3rd, 1903, that, quote, presently the noise opened up again, as though Satan and a regiment of imps were coming forth for battle. Imagine their surprise and terror as not just one Van Meter monster, but 2 flew out of the mine. The second one was smaller, and all who witnessed it, they assumed that it was the baby of the bigger one that had already been seen. The men opened fire on the creatures. The Des Moines Daily News described their barrage of gunfire as one that, quote, would have sunk the Spanish fleet. But aside from the unearthly noise and the peculiar odor, they did not seem to mind it, but slowly descended the shaft of the old mine. End quote. The townsfolk acted quickly, caving in the top of the mine, trapping the Van Meter monster down in the mine before it or its offspring could fly back out. And it worked, because the Van Meter Visitor was never seen again. Well, sort of. There are still isolated reports to this day. The most recent was in 2006. Now, for those skeptics out there, that was 7 years before the annual Van Meter Visitor Festival began in 2013.
So that's interesting that it was 7 years before the annual festival, because you know how sometimes these creatures are seen very close to when festivals are starting.
Well, yeah, people get all excited and sightings happen to ramp up.
Right.
Before and after.
Right, but this one was, the last one was 6 years before it, or 7 years before it.
Exactly.
So that makes it even more credible.
Next, for a different kind of cryptid, we're headed to Kansas, to the city of Inman. Like Van Meter, Inman is a small city with a population of just 1,341 people. Anyways, what is now Kansas was originally part of the Louisiana Purchase back in 1803, and it became an official state in 1861. 6 years later, McPherson County was established, and the town of Inman, originally called Aiken, was founded in 1887, relatively close to the Santa Fe Trail. McPherson County is home to a wetland complex, and the part that sits just southeast of Inman is known as the Farland Lake Marshes, made up of Little Sinkhole Number 1, Little Sinkhole Number 2, and the Big Sinkhole. And this is where our story begins. According to ruralmessenger.com, people came to the sinkholes and nearby Lake Inman for the excellent fishing and duck hunting. But in 1952, 2 local fishermen saw something that changed the town of Inman forever. As they fished, some sort of terrifying creature came close to their boat. The men said it was serpent-like, and it was massive. Some accounts say it was 12 feet long, and others say it was as long as 30 feet. It was 18 inches in diameter and at least as big around as a tire from the 1951 REO Speedwagon. The men also said that it hissed at them and splashed water at them before it submerged back beneath the water and disappeared. Quickly dubbed Sinkhole Sam, the horrifying lake serpent didn't wait long before showing itself again. 18-year-old Mennonite farm boy Albert Newfield spotted Sinkhole Sam while he was standing on a bridge. The intrepid young man aimed his shotgun and fired, but Sinkhole Sam slithered away unharmed. Albert added to the description, saying Sinkhole Sam had a mouthful of sharp teeth and a pointed tail. Another local, George Rieger, saw Sinkhole Sam as well, agreeing that the serpent was as thick around as a car tire. The locals began wondering if Sinkhole Sam was some sort of prehistoric creature who had been living in an underground cavern. Perhaps its lair had flooded, and Sam was released out into the sinkhole. According to HeySpot.com, the most well-known Sinkhole Sam sighting happened on November 23, 1952. A group of hunters were out by Big Sinkhole when they spotted some sort of creature in the weeds. At first, they thought it was dead, but as they approached it, it quickly slithered into the water. They estimated that it was 20 feet long and had no eyes or nose, but it did have a rather large mouth. Soon after, newspaper reporter Ernest Alva Dewey arrived in Inman, ready to report on Sinkhole Sam. Dewey was not one to take these types of sightings very seriously. According to KansasCityMag.com, Dewey once attributed UFO sightings to a dragon that he said was called a ball-tailed snicklehoopus.
UFO sightings are actually a dragon called a snicklehoopus.
That's what he's claiming.
Okay. So it seems like he didn't take anything out of the ordinary as a serious thing.
Well, I guess you could say that because his article about Sinkhole Sam was written with the same sense of skeptical humor. In it, he claimed that he was aided by a Dr. Aramis P. Quattlebaum, and together they determined that Sinkhole Sam was nothing more than a Foopengurkel.
A what?
A Foopengurkel. You know what?
You had such a serious look on your face as you said Foopengurkel.
This guy might be a dick, but my God, he has the best names ever.
A Foopengurkel. Did he say anything more about the Foopengurkel?
Well, yes, he did.
Okay.
Dewey went on to explain that a Fupengurkle, the extinctest creature ever to inhabit the Kansas plains, does indeed spend most of its time in underwater caverns, and that the big sinkhole was undoubtedly his backyard swimming pool.
Oh, well, sure.
Makes sense, right?
Sure.
The 500 or so locals had nothing to worry about, since Fupengurkles were known vegetarians and terribly dumb.
Oh, nice.
He also stated that Sinkhole Sam was undoubtedly male, since there was no such thing as a female Fupengurkle.
Oh, that's great. So, you can't have Fupengurkles without a male and a female, right? So he was really pushing it. Bet you people were mad.
Well, I'd be a little insulted. Now, I'm sure the locals who had seen Sinkhole Sam for themselves weren't very pleased by Dewey's scathing and tongue-in-cheek report of their encounters. But it seemed that other readers took his scientific report seriously, because one Sunday, not long after the article was published, local farmer Mill Penner arrived home from church to dozens of cars parked all along Big Sinkhole. Every single one of them was packed with curious families hoping to catch sight of the serpent.
The Fupengurkle. That's just fun to say.
By 1953, news of Sinkhole Sam's existence reached the Newspaper Enterprise Association in Kansas City. They sent their own reporter, Mary K. Flynn, to Inman. Flynn was more practical in her approach, interviewing locals like Albert Newfield and George Rieger, who had actually seen the creature. Her conclusion was that Kansas had its very own Loch Ness Monster. From there, Sinkhole Sam went national. But the witnesses, like George Rieger and their families, well, they didn't really want to talk about it anymore. They soon found the story embarrassing, especially since the more it was told, the more outlandish it became. Each new teller added another foot or more to the serpent's length, or added details that just weren't true. However, Mill Penner's daughter, Marcy, points out in the KansasCityMag.com article that she does believe the original stories because Sinkhole Sam was seen by Mennonites, who were not prone to exaggeration. Not long into 1953, Sinkhole Sam seemed to have moved on to other watering holes. The sightings in Inman just stopped. But a decade later, in the late 1960s, they picked up once again, only this time in Kingman, Kansas. Kingman, which is less than 54 miles south of Inman, is home to the man-made Kingman County State Lake, a 148-square-acre body of water. At only 11 feet deep, at its deepest point, it offers up some excellent fishing. There are catfish, bluegill, largemouth bass, and northern pike, just to name a few. And apparently, in the late 60s, it offered a great hideout for Sinkhole Sam, or at least a creature pretty similar. Kingman locals initially noticed something was wrong when their cattle and other livestock were disappearing. Found horribly mutilated by the edge of Kingman Lake, the farmers and ranchers were baffled by their wounds, other than they knew that it had to be some sort of powerful predator that was taking down their animals. According to the site jackandkitty.com, a group of well-armed hunters decided to take out the massive snake that was said to be causing all the destruction. The hunters, carrying not just guns, but also harpoons, they scoured the swamps and marshes surrounding the lake. But other than seeing some ripples in the water, they didn't see or catch a thing. So that begs the question, what ever happened to Sinkhole Sam. Unlike the Van Meter monster, Sinkhole Sam wasn't encapsulated somewhere to eventually die. For all we know, he's still out there swimming around somewhere, ready to show his sharp teeth.
You know what I love? Foopengurkle.
Now, that would have been an excellent name for a cryptid, but how insulting can someone be?
I know, they're vegetarian and they're dumb, just like all the people that believe in it, is basically what he was saying.
That guy was such a dick.
I know.
Wasn't he?
But a Foopengurkle is a great name. You have to give him credit for his creativity.
Perhaps we can all collectively try to summon a Foopengurkle.
We should. We'll do a thought experiment with a Foopengurkle.
Oh my God, that's what we should do.
Not in our lake. We'll have to pick somebody else's lake.
Yeah, we already have our own lake monster.
Yeah, that we don't need them.
Oh my God, Champion the Foopengurkle could battle it out.
I know that would be... I don't know whether that would be hilarious or terrifying.
That would bring some tourists to the town besides the Battle of Plattsburgh.
Come check it out. Foopengurkle versus Champion 2024.
We need to get right on that thought experiment. Well, dear, I think that about wraps it up for this episode.
Yes, so as always, if you would like to know more, you can always check our sources in our show notes to see where we were inspired to put the episode together. And you can always read all the things that we didn't cover and go down your own rabbit hole.
And with that said, join us next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.